Okay, so it's pretty much signed off with that model now, and we can go ahead and start skinning with this character. So to do this, I'm just going to go to the top right hand corner, and we're going to go switch this to select by name, and if we type times JT capital BN times, it's called a wildcard, and what that means is it's going to select everything with JTBN in it, which, if we remember, is the bind joints. So just hit enter, and we just want to spin around this model and check that we've got all the joints selected that we want. And it's one thing to remember that it looks like it's got these end joints selected, but these were called JT end, so they're only white because their parent's been selected, so these are actually selected. Okay, so it's looking good, so we're going to hold shift, select the mesh, and actually before we do this, one thing we need to do again is we're going to add a few blend shapes to this for the squashy and stretchiness of the antennas and arms, and also later on in the next set of tutorials we'll be doing facial rigging, so we want a copy of the mesh before it's skinned if we want to do some blend shapes with it. And it's always a good idea to do this before you start skinning, because if you start skinning and for instance you decide to move some of these joints, which in turn moves the mesh slightly, you could then use that, you could think that that's the default pose of this character, but it's been moved by the joints. So then if you duplicated that and used it as a blend shape, as we said in earlier lessons when we were doing the bendiness of the arm, it needs to be a perfect copy. So if it's been moved slightly, that means every blend shape we apply, so like if we did a smile for this character or different mouth shapes, if for instance some of these joints down here moved slightly, which moved the vertices, we might have a slight defect down here. But then if we, which might not look too bad, it might just move slightly, but as blend shapes add together, we could say like have 4 or 5 different blend shapes working on the mouth at the same time, which would then make this defect multiply by 5 or 6, so it'll start to bulge out. So it's always good practice to just create a duplicate of the mesh straight away, and I'm just going to hide that. So it's just there in the models group for when we need to use it. And you can always get, because we're saving incrementally, you could always get a copy of the mesh from an earlier save, but I just prefer to have a copy always on call that I can always just go back to. Okay, so I'm going to type it out again, times JT capital BN times, and then I'll select the mesh, and we're going to go to animation, going to go to skin, bind skin, and if you're using previous versions of Maya, you won't have the interactive skin bind. I think it was 2011 it was added, not too sure, but for this we're going to use the interactive skin bind, but the methods we're going to talk over are pretty much identical to the smooth bind. So don't worry if you're using a previous version of Maya, the things that we're going to go across are exactly the same. And after we've used the interactive skin bind, we're actually going to use the normal, paint weights tool. So we'll be using the same tools that previous versions of Maya use as well. So don't be put off if we're using this interactive bind. So let's go to the options. Okay, so the first option is bind to, and we want to bind this to, because we selected each joint individually, we selected all the bound joints, I want to do this to the selected joints. If we use joint hierarchy, that would mean that if we select the wrist, it's going to skin with every single joint below it, and if we remember these are the JT end joints, it means it's going to skin with them as well, but we don't want to do that. So for this reason we just want to select with selected joints. Bind method, you can use closest in hierarchy, which it's going to be looking at the hierarchy and then looking at the closest joint in that area, but I prefer to use the closest distance, which is the physical distance between these joints, because the joints are in a place, they are in the place that we want it to skin. So I want this to skin around these edge loops here. That just means that we're going to be using the correct joints to skin in that area. Okay, so the next thing is well, the next thing we're bothered about here is the volume type. So I'm just going to leave that as capsule as default, and I'll show what that means in a sec. And then the skinning method is classic linear, dual quaternion, or weight blended. And for this, and this is the same settings that you'll have in the normal skinning if you're using the older skinning tool. So classic linear basically means each one of these vertices, or CVs if it's an NURB surface, has a weight value, and that basically means if it was 75% weighted to this joint here and 25% weighted to that, it means it's going to take 25% of this joint's, translate, rotates and scales, and 75% of this. It's going to blend both of them to get its position. Now, that's the normal sort of skinning that we're pretty much all familiar with. There's also dual quaternion, which is a way of painting on dual quaternion weights on the mesh, which basically allows it to work better with crumpling. So we'd quite like that for like these arms, because these are going to crumple quite a bit when they're twisting. But a best method for me is the weight blended, because that means we can use the classic linear and the dual quaternion together. So I'm going to switch it to weight blended. And then there's the max influence. So this basically means how many joints can affect a vertex or CV. And we've got it set to 4, so that would mean, for instance, this vertex here could only be affected by 4 joints. And it's because it's closest distance, that would probably be, looking at it, this vertex will probably be these 4 joints down here. Now, because it's in this large bulky area, we probably would actually want it to be affected by this top joint up here, so we could increase the max influence to allow that. But what I'm going to do here is actually uncheck maintain max influence, so after bind. So if you're doing any sort of game characters, the game engines they prefer it if you've got the minimum max influence as possible. So you could still get a decent skinning with even probably free max influence. So that's going to run better in real time, so run better in the game engine. And you probably want to check maintain max influence on, but for animation and VFX I'm going to uncheck that. So that means after the skinning, it's going to skin this with a max influence of 4, but afterwards I can manually add this joint up here, so that I can tell a vertex to have 5 or 6 influences. So it's going to bind it with 4, but then I have the flexibility to add more later on. And I'll just hit apply. Okay, so and just hit close. So if you've done the normal skinning, the skin smooth bind option, you're going to get a little bit of a different result to us. So because it's the interactive smooth skin, what it does is we chose capsules, and that's going to create these capsules, and it's basically a way of doing a sort of rough skinning. So you can see here, selecting these capsules, selecting the green, can move them in and out. There's the move tool in the middle, so we can move this capsule about. And then there's these blue lines at the top and sides, which if we select we can scale up and down. And there's also these red ones, which are like the width of that capsule. So unlike the normal skinning, it will go ahead and try weight this, and then we have to go in and paint manual weights. So if we ever lose the tool, what we can do is select the mesh and just go to skin, edit smooth skin, interactive skin weights tool. Let's click the option box and try find one of these joints again. So it's pretty much the same as the skin weights tool, it's just allowing us to edit these quite easily. So if you're using the default skinning tools, you just want to go ahead and try and match. So here I'm painting the joint for here, so you probably just want to paint this area here to match what we're doing here. And it's important to remember that these are just an approximation. These are just going to get the bulk of the skinning done. So we still want to refine the skinning afterwards. We don't want to use the interactive skinning as the only skinning method. So we can actually use the normal paint weight tool after this. So this is going to give us a good rough skinning, and then afterwards we're going to refine it with the paint weights tool. So here you can see I've got the wrist selected, the left wrist, but we can see it's mirrored it across to the right, and that's because we've got reflection here. So Maya knows that we've reflected these joints over, and much like the the move tool when we're reflecting, it's going to look either the world or the object. So because this has been mirrored across the center, I'm going to set to world. If we set object, so if your character is symmetrical but not symmetrical to the grid, you want to pick object. And all that's going to do is take the bounding box, so the max volume that this takes up, and just divide it in two, and it's going to mirror across there. You can choose the axes and the tolerance. So the tolerance is basically, if you have mirrored this rig across, but the joints are just slightly out of place, by a few millimeters or something, or whatever your scale grid you've got, you can increase the tolerance here. So it's going to mirror across and then search within this distance for its opposite joint. And if it's in that provided distance, it'll mirror it across, and you'll have what you see in here. The next down here you have the fall off, and then you also have the colours. So red's going to be like max influence, moving down to yellow and blue, where it's sort of falling off. So what I'm going to do here is, as you can see, as I start moving these about, you can see it's happening on the opposite side as well. So all we're going to do is go through and just move these into place. So this is the, just check at the top, this is the left wrist. So I want this to be sort of the palm area. And if you see anything like this, vertices flying off in space, this is when vertices have no influence over any joints, and it creates this horrible looking error. So if this happens, you either want to reweight another joint to those vertices, or just keep them in there. So actually I do want it like this, but if you have this at any time, you just want to get it so they're not flipping out, and then edit those skin weights with the skin weights tool later on. So I'm just going to move this into place. We could move this, just get that volume of the palm, move down. So these fingers here, you can see how quickly we can sort of get these into place. But a lot of these fingers, the skinning for these fingers is working quite well. So one thing we'll need to do is, like here you can see it's sort of bleeding onto the other finger over here. So this is where we'll need to use the skin weights tool, the paint skin weights tool, to just remove that. We're never going to be able to get the capsule fully off, so we could try scale this in. Again, these are flipping off. We can approximate it as best we can. But we're always going to go in here and recheck with the normal skin weights tool. Okay, so let's go through here quite quickly and just get a good approximation for these. And because this rig's been mirrored, I know that I don't have to check. I know it's happening on the other side. Okay, that's looking good. Move up here. So we can see we added this eye earlier on. So this is the point. And if we move these capsules together, because this is sort of a sphere, I'm just going to move these capsules together. You can see now it's locked it as a sphere. So now I can just move that into place. I'm just going to scale that up actually. So the redder it is, the more influence it has on those joints. If you remember, we want to have pretty much a large influence over the top of the eye. So I'm just going to... Okay, the right wrist. We mirrored this over, so I know I don't need to edit this. I'm just going to scroll down. Base of the shell. So I'm going to move these in a bit. This is where we're getting some bad crumpling around the shoulders. So I can sort of scale that in so it doesn't affect the shoulders as much. And the ribbon, so these along here. It's looking quite good actually. So it's done quite a good job. We could move some of these in, but there's not many other joints to affect it in that area. So like this start of the ribbon joint here, if we rotate this antenna, we don't want it to start crumpling this entire area down here. So I'm just going to move these in, and because these are like single joints, I'm just going to lock them together to get that sphere and just use that as a skinning. The same up here, get that sphere and lock it in. And as we go up, it doesn't matter as a capsule because there's not anything in the middle or on the outside to take that influence if we scale these out. So I'm just going to leave these as normal and just move my way up and just double check these. And like here, I don't want it to influence the top of the eye, just this part of the eye. Okay, so now we'll move on to the arms. Again with the arms, this is where the crumpling happened. So you can see as we rotated this arm joint, this is why when we were testing the skinning earlier, it was crumpling this entire area around here. So I'm just going to move this in to a sphere, scale this right down. And I do want to have it, I can move this capsule out again to make it a capsule instead of a sphere, because I do want it to have quite a large influence over that area, and I'll get it to drop off quite quickly. So you can see how quick we can get the skinning, and this is going to be no means the end of the skinning. We'll need to refine this area quite a bit, but you can see how quickly we can get these capsules to get a good approximation. So the second ribbon, scale this, so I'm going to move this in. Scale it right down. Oops, so actually we've got the wrong joint there selected. Make sure we've got this. So select the mesh to get back onto that tool. So unlike the paint weights tool, much like the paint weights tool, sorry, we have to select the mesh and then get this tool up. So wait, the ribbon 2. That's massive. So let's scale that right down. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to go through these, double check them all. The antenna, we've done the left antenna, so the right antenna should be fine. And the same with the arm. So we've gone all through all those joints, and we can start testing this now. So start moving these about. I'm just going to switch to IK and start seeing this, and you can see instantly how that's improved. Round here we don't have that massive crumpling. Still got a bit of a weird twist in here, a weird crumpling area, so we want to refine that skinning a lot more, but we can see straight away, and we're getting this nice bend in here from that double joint. It's not collapsing like a broken straw. It is kind of collapsing up here, so again we want to fix those areas. So now's just a case of going through this, moving all these joints about and seeing what we need to fix. So like down here you can see actually it's quite linear, it breaks off. You know, there's no influence, and then all of a sudden there's influence, and that's why with the capsules it's not going to do a 100% decent job. It gets a good approximation, but we need to go in and edit that. So one main thing, we added those extra edge loops, so I just want to see, I'm going to put the full arm twist on and start rotating this, and I'll put wireframe on shaded. So now we can see, because we added those extra edge loops, we'll need to edit some of the skinning, but we can see that twist isn't collapsing, it's keeping that twist quite well. Select the bend, and we'll start looking at this sine wave a bit. So here we can see how good that is. That is awesome. So you can see by having the extra, so having that about 21 joints for the ribbon spine and having those extra edge loops, you can see how well that deformation is holding. We're not getting any awkward pinching, we're not getting any crumpling. I mean, this bend here is working really well. So we haven't done a lot of skinning really, and we've already got this really good flexible result. Mesmerizing. Okay, so I'll just reset these back to zeros, or the defaults. Probably check these antennas. Do the same. So obviously here we can see it's not looking too good there. Probably have to change the skinning slightly. So we're just really looking for the areas that need the most work, really. Again, these eyes, we added that extra joint, so we just want to check that that joint's working. We can see, yeah, that's working quite well. As we rotate this eye about, the whole eye is staying with that eye. Okay. Okay, so in the next lesson we're going to go through and use the normal skin weights tool and just go ahead and start refining some of the weights on this character.